Hi, I'm Chris from Rware, and today we're exploring the Rware Segment Sequencer module for Voltage Modular. Get creative with your curves. Segment Sequencer is a multi-stage envelope generator, LFO, oscillator, and even a wave shaper. Let's dive deep into the controls and, most importantly, the segment canvas. Starting from the former, Segment Sequencer dynamically adjusts to the chosen mode. Speaking of, there are 4 distinct modes of operation: oscillator, LFO, envelope generator, and shaper. In oscillator mode, Segment Sequencer runs at audio rate. The dynamic control reflects that by giving you the controls over the bass octave and fine-tuning from -700 to +700 cents. Furthermore, in oscillator mode you have the option to select an oversampling factor. Please note, at 1x oversampling, the up and down sampling filters are disabled. Use this for precise, unaltered audio rate modulation. For audio though, it is recommended to use at least 2x oversampling to mitigate aliasing. As a rule of thumb, the more discontinuities in your curve, like jumps or sharp corners, the higher the oversampling factor should be. You can re-trigger or sync the oscillator with the trick button or trick CV input. The volt per octave input is a pitch CV in this mode, which lets you play the oscillator in tune. In LFO mode, Segment Sequencer drastically decreases the frequency range to 20 Hz max. The dynamic control set changes to frequency and fine frequency instead. You also have the option to change to tempo sync mode, which replaces the frequency controls with a tempo ratio that's relative to the set BPM. The trick button and CV input reset the LFO to the start. The volt per octave input controls the frequency exponentially in this mode. Every positive volt doubles the frequency, whereas every negative volt halves the frequency. This also applies in tempo sync mode. In envelope mode, Segment Sequencer behaves similarly to LFO mode, but it won't restart the cycle at the end. This is a one-shot mode, which can be triggered with the trick button and trick CV input. Contrary to LFO mode, you get time controls instead of frequency controls in free mode to set the duration of the envelope. When in tempo sync mode, the tempo ratio can be set relative to the host BPM again. The volt per octave input is an exponential control over the speed. Every positive volt halves the duration of the one shot, whereas every negative volt doubles the duration of the envelope. Last, there's the shaper mode, which turns Segment Sequencer into a waveform modulation shaper. The whole frequency and trigger section turns into the shaper controls. But most importantly, the volt per octave input is replaced by the shaper input. Use this input to feed a signal into the shaper. The range switch lets you select whether you want the curve to apply to the signal from 0 to +5 volt or from -5 to +5 volt. Combine this option with the output polarity to create various shaping configurations. The bounce switch lets you choose how the shaper deals with overshoots. When clip is selected, the input signal is restricted to the ±5 volt range. Exceeding signals will be clipped to this ceiling. In fold configuration, exceeding signals will be folded back at ±5 volt. When wrap is set, the signal will wrap around the ±5 volt boundary to the opposing end. Just as in oscillator mode, you get to choose which oversampling factor to apply. When using audio rate signals, it is recommended to use at least 2x oversampling, and to increase this factor, the more complex the drawn curve becomes. At 1x oversampling, the whole oversampling is disabled and the signal is left untouched by any anti-aliasing filters. This setting should be preferred when using the shaper mode as a curve remapper. The trick button and CV have been replaced by a drive knob and drive CV input. Use these to increase or decrease the strength of the signal going into the shaper. Next to the frequency and mode controls are the interpolation options. The interpolation switch determines how values are calculated that are in between the drawn pixels. When you select none, every value is output as is and there are no in-between values. Instead, the value from the last matching pixel is held. This is useful to create sharp and snappy shapes that transition instantly. When you want a smoother curve, you can choose between linear and spline. Both modes will interpolate the in-between values. The difference is that linear will draw a straight line connecting the values at the surrounding pixels, whereas spline will try to match a smooth curve instead. It is advised to use spline interpolation for oscillator mode, as it provides the smoothest curve and therefore the lowest aliasing when driving the curve at audio rate. Usually, linear interpolation should be chosen for the majority of use cases though. Right below the interpolation setting is the link setting. Enabling the switch upper position will link the start and end point of the curve. This will guarantee a smoothly looping curve, as it helps the interpolation to wrap around. For cycling modes such as Oscillator or LFO, this should be the preferred setting. Next up are the tension and smooth options. Tension lets you choose between different shaping functions that connect the points of the drawn sequence. From top to bottom, the tension gets increasingly steep. The lowest option is smooth and versatile. The middle option lets you dial in very steep transitions that are still somewhat smooth. The top option is literal step mode, which replaces the curve tension with a transition region. The latter option is best suited for step sequences and stepwise modulation. In general, the bottom option should fit most needs. In addition to the tension modes, there's the option to apply a smoothing overlay to the curves, which ensures that points are connected smoothly. This smoothing depends on the selected tension mode, but in general it turns the transition regions into S-shaped curves that ease in and out of points. The following section is all about the phase. The phase control offsets the starting point. In oscillator mode, the accompanying CV input can even be used for phase modulation. PDX and PDY are phase distortion modifiers, in vertical and horizontal direction respectively. Use these controls and CV inputs to alter the internal phaser to advance faster or slower through the curve. Bend X will bend the phase to squeeze the curve horizontally to the front or back. Bend Y will squeeze the curve vertically to the top or bottom. Segment Sequencer comes equipped with a slew limiter that lets you configure the rise and fall speeds of the output curves. This is a perfect fit to gently smooth sharp transitions and jumps, which help to prevent clicking. Skipping over the grid setting for now, we arrive at the output setting. The polarity selector enables you to determine if the output shall be unipolar, bipolar, or alternating bipolar. Unipolar will output the whole curve as a positive only signal from 0 to plus 5 volt. Bipolar will set the 0 volt line in the middle of the curve and output the whole curve from minus 5 volt to plus 5 volt. Alternating bipolar mode is a combination of the two modes, where the whole curve itself is output as a unipolar signal back and forth, alternating between positive and negative voltage. The outputs next to the segment canvas output their corresponding curve as indicated by the color coding. At the very bottom there is the all-out polyphonic output, which outputs all curves at once as a polyphonic signal. The first voice is the topmost curve, the red curve. The all-out is limited to the global number of voice settings in voltage modular, but will at most output 8 simultaneous signals, counting from top red to bottom purple. Let's get to the star of the show, the segment canvas. You can select a curve to edit with the toggle buttons on the left of the canvas. Once a curve is selected, it is drawn in its color with its handles. When approaching a point with your cursor, it will highlight to indicate that it is ready to be edited. Click and drag points across the canvas to shape the curve, or add points by double-clicking on an empty space. When dragging a point, you can hold down Control on Windows or Command on Mac to enable fine-tuning mode. You can also hold down the Shift key to restrict the movement in the first direction, removing the point. You can reset this direction by letting go of the Shift key and holding it back down. You can also use the Alt key to temporarily toggle grid snap. When you move towards the tension handle on the curve between 2 points, it'll also highlight to indicate it can be edited. You can move the tension up or down, which will have different effects depending on the chosen tension mode. Notably, the step mode will move the transition region to the right or left if you drag the tension up or down. Use the right click on the highlighted point or tension handle to reset or remove it. Start and end point as well as tension handles are reset to their default positions, whereas regular points are removed upon right click. If you right click on an empty space in the canvas, you can invoke the segment canvas context menu, which gives you many more options to modify the curve. Here you can reset the curve to its default state if you get stuck somewhere. You can also normalize the curve, which will enlarge the curve so that its lowest point touches the bottom and its highest point touches the top of the canvas. You can manually have the curve point snap to the currently set grid, and you can also clean up, duplicate and overlapping points. It is worth mentioning that the cleanup will only remove one offending point at a time. If you have multiple overlapping points, you need to invoke this command multiple times. Speaking of repeating a command, the first option in the context menu is to repeat the last command, which will of course change with every command you execute. A little further down is a copy menu, which lets you copy and paste the current curve to other curves within the same segment sequencer module and even in between multiple segment sequencer modules. To do this, simply copy the curve you wish to copy on one instance and select Paste on the other instance. Next up is the Mult menu, which lets you double and triple the curve or half and third the curve or its points. The difference in the latter two options is that halving the curve will literally cut the curve in half, whereas halving the points will instead remove half of the points from the end and stretch the resulting curve to fit the canvas. Moving on, you get to the Flip menu, which enables you to flip the curve vertically or horizontally. Finally, you have a wide selection of randomization options in the Random submenu. You can choose to randomize everything or only certain attributes of a curve. Remember that the last executed command is available as a shortcut in the context menu, so quickly browsing through random curves is simplified. In addition to the segment canvas, you have the grid options, which lets you configure a background grid of up to 64 steps in either direction. You can toggle grid snap for X and Y, vertical or horizontal, independently. This option will restrict the editing of points to the currently configured grid. Remember, you can toggle this behavior temporarily with the Alt key modifier when dragging points. So that's about it for this overview of the Aware segment sequencer. This highly versatile MSEQ carries your patches to the next level with endless modulation and shaping capabilities. Make sure to check it out in the Cherry Audio store. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you around!